Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 136. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is my Masters of the Universe Origins Deluxe figures. So this is the 6th video in a series I've been doing reviewing all of the Masters of the Universe Origins figures. So I previously reviewed waves 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Series 6 is due out soon, but I don't have that yet. So anyway, what I've decided to do today is look at the deluxe figures. So like Ram Man here, these are figures that weren't included in any of the waves per se. They tend to come out maybe in between the waves or just kind of on their own. So I guess the first set of deluxe figures was He-Man and Skeletor. They came out shortly after wave 1. And then we got Ram Man and Clam Champ. And then the next set of deluxe figures seemed like it was going to be Hordak and Mosquito, but I was able to get Hordak a while ago. I've had him for like over a month now, but I still don't have Mosquito, so I won't be covering him in this video, but hopefully we'll cover him sometime in the future. So yeah, if you've watched any of the other videos in this series, basically I'm just going to go through each figure, kind of talk about my history with the character, and compare it to some of the previous releases of these characters. So, yeah, let's get right into it, and these are the deluxe figures. So the first deluxe figure that we're going to take a look at is Clam Champ. Now, Clam Champ was one of the heroic allies of He-Man, and the original figure was released back in 1987, which was essentially the last year of the vintage Masters of the Universe toy line. And I told you before in one of the earlier videos that my brother Doug and I were really into He-Man, but it was really only for the first year or two, and we had really kind of like lost interest by the time the line fizzled out. So we did not have any of the 87 figures, so neither of us had Clam Champ. And in fact, I think King Hiss was the only 1986 figure that we had as well. So all of the figures that Doug and I had were from 82, 83, 84, and into maybe 85. So, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of exposure to Clam Champ because he came late in the line. I don't believe he ever got to appear in the Filmation cartoon and wasn't really featured in much of the media at all. So, yeah, no exposure to the vintage Clam Champ figure. But I think this figure here, like all the Origins figures, does a pretty good job of recreating the vintage figure. So if you were a fan of Clam Champ back in the day, I imagine you'll like this one just fine as well. Now, Clam Champ shares a lot of parts with other figures. Just like in the vintage toy line, most figures, or at least a lot of the figures, they reused the same body. There was only like 3 or 4 different bodies for most of the characters. There was kind of like the heroic human one, and then there was like the hairy body, and then there was kind of like the monster body with the 3 toes. So Clam Champ here shares a lot of parts with He-Man. So you'll see down from the boots with the straps around them and the furry tops, the belt and the shorts, the arms with the cuffs. I imagine those are all the exact same as He-Man back in the vintage line as well as in the Origins line. Now, one thing that was kind of different for Clam Champ is at least a lot of the characters got unique heads and they got unique armor. So that's really what's like differentiated the characters back in the vintage line. But the vintage Clam Champ actually even reused his armor from Fisto. So I have seen that this particular wave that he was part of back in the old days was Mattel wanted to get another line out, but they didn't want to spend a lot of money. So that they did reuse more parts than they would even have normally done. So just like in the vintage line, I'll bring Fisto out here for a second. You'll see that the armor is the exact same, just painted differently. So it makes it look different enough. Like on Clam Champs, they don't bother to bring out the details here. This all looks like one piece. Whereas on Fisto's, the purple and the silver help to break that up. And looks a little better. I think it would have been nice if maybe Clam Champ got more color there, but it is what it is. But otherwise, you can see how they share the same arms, the same torso and crotch pieces and belts and everything. So they're all pretty much the same from the neck down. But Clam Champ does have a unique head sculpt. And one thing that's kind of strange with this head sculpt is that they've sculpted him with his mouth open. So you can see here his teeth are exposed. He's kind of got gritted teeth, which is not true to the vintage figure. They did the same thing on the Origins Triclops figure, and I forgot to mention that in that video. But the vintage figure had a closed mouth, and the Origins figure has kind of his teeth showing. So I'm not sure why they did that, but that's what they did. Now, as for comparisons, so I don't have the vintage figure. Clam Champ did not get an action figure in the 2002 relaunch, but he did get a Staction figure. And if you've watched any of my other videos, or maybe if you just have some knowledge of Masters of the Universe, basically what that means is that in 2002, the Four Horsemen are a group of toy sculptors, and they were hired to kind of redesign the He-Man figures with a little bit more dynamic, anime-inspired designs. And they put out a couple lines of figures, which I thought were really great, but unfortunately the line got canceled before they had a chance to finish, and before a lot of characters like Clam Champ here made it into the toy line. But what the Four Horsemen were able to do was continue the line as statues that were to scale with the action figures. So the Staction figures didn't move at all, they were not articulated, but it gave collectors a chance to put some of these cool redesigns of characters on their shelf with their 2002 action figures. So the 2002 Clam Champ is a really cool redesign. I've said it in all my past videos, I really liked what the Horsemen did with that 2002 redesign. I would have been happy to see that go on for years and years. Unfortunately, that wasn't meant to be. So after the 2002 line kind of lost steam, then we got the Classics line, which launched in 2008. And we got our first and only version of Clam Champ in the Classics line in 2013. So here is the Classics Clam Champ. So you see here, he carries over a lot of the design elements that you would expect to see. You know, they haven't changed much about him. One thing that they did change, which I like right off the bat, is the armor. So he's still got that Fisto armor, but the fact that they did separate this, it's still all blue, so you know it's not too far astray from the vintage look, but just having that difference of blue, so that metallic lighter blue over the darker blue, that looks really nice, and it's a shame that that didn't maybe carry over into the Origins line. This is also the first time that he got this accessory. So I guess when they were designing the Classics figures, you know, they felt Clam Champ needed a little bit more. So he still has this claw device, which is just like he had in the vintage line. And how this works is you put these red claws back, and in the vintage toy you press this lever, and these things would shoot out forward like so and grab another character by the waist. Now with the Classics line, they didn't really add any play features like that, so that's why you have to manually move these claws. But so he's got that, a nice recreation of his vintage weapon, and then they also gave him this extra clamp, I guess. I don't know what he does with it exactly, but it's just something else to give him. Now, I will say, you know, I was never a big Clam Champ fan because I never had him as a kid, and when I got the Classics version, I didn't necessarily love this head sculpt. And it's my understanding that the Four Horsemen, they did have some additional designers working with them that weren't part of the original team, and those extra guys were tasked with some of the other sculpting. So like Jitsu and Clam Champ, they were sculpted by this other guy, and I think it's kind of obvious. There's just something about that head sculpt that looks a little off to me. Like, it doesn't bother me as much as it used to, but it just didn't seem consistent with the look of other Classics figures. But it's not so bad. Anyway, this is a pretty decent Clam Champ figure. Probably the best Clam Champ figure we're ever going to get. Anyway, on to the Origins one here now. So you see here, he's got the big clamp, just like the vintage figure and just like the Classics figure. Except this one, the action feature is intact. So you press the button. Here you go. And then those claws clamp out forward so they can grab a character. So that's pretty cool that that's back in place. And then they gave him this thing too. It doesn't move. It doesn't really have any function. It's kind of soft rubber so you can move it around a little bit. But yeah, it doesn't clamp shut or anything like that. So yeah, an odd weapon. Anyway, so what makes Clam Champ here deluxe? It's hard to say why Mattel chooses certain characters to be deluxe or not, but when they are deluxe, they come on larger packaging that's got some original card art like on the front of the packaging, not just on the back, and they also have more accessories. So he's got his 2 weapons that you've already seen, and then he's got an extra hand, which is kind of odd. You get pretty used to seeing extra hands with your Marvel Legends figures. You know, they give you punching hands and open hands and grabbing hands. But it's not something that you expect to see with Masters of the Universe, especially when they only give you 1 hand. It just seems kind of strange. So you can give him 1 open hand if you want him to start slapping people around. But, yeah, otherwise he's just got his 2 gripping hands. And then the other accessory they gave him, again, which seems kind of strange to me, is an alternate head, which I don't find is all that different from the head that he's got. This one seems to be smiling, whereas this one seems to be, I don't know, grunting or whatever you would call that. This one looks a little angrier. This one doesn't exactly look happy. It looks a little more malicious. But if anything, I would have thought maybe they would give us a head sculpt with his teeth showing and maybe one without his teeth showing. Like, even that wouldn't seem like really different enough to justify giving us an extra head. But considering that no previous version of Clam Champ, neither the vintage one, the Staction figure, or the Classics version, ever had an open mouth with teeth showing, it seems weird that they would give us 2 heads and both of them have the teeth showing on this guy. It's not a bad look. I don't really mind it. I don't care that he doesn't have a closed mouth version, but it just seems strange to me that they didn't do that. I don't really know why they gave us a smiling head. Again, if he was a character that had appeared in the cartoon a lot, maybe was known to smile, and they thought, you know what, even though the toys always look a little angry, we should give him that smiling head because he was always known to be smiling. But he wasn't. So, again, just a weird choice. Anyway, by making him a deluxe figure and giving us these extra parts, Mattel was able to charge an extra $5 for him. I don't really mind. I don't really care. The extra accessories, even though I don't typically use them, are, they're kind of fun. They probably add some play value for kids. And even with the extra $5, these are still the cheapest action figures I buy. So the price is still right on these guys. So, yeah, there you go. That is Clam Champ. So the next deluxe figure we're going to take a look at is Battle Armor He-Man. So even though most people associate He-Man with the, the little straps across his chest with the little red cross on there, the Battle Armor look is probably his second most well-known look. For a lot of kids, this was probably the first and only He-Man figure they had when they were kids. The original He-Man came out in the very first year, back in 82, and then the secondary version we got in 1984 with the new battle armor function. So instead of just the straps across his chest, he's got this full silver armor that covers his whole torso. So yeah, it's a cool figure. Me and my brother did not own Battle Armor He-Man, and we didn't own Battle Armor Skeletor either. But one of my good friends must have. I do remember playing with Battle Armor He-Man and Skeletor as a kid. And to be honest, I didn't play toys with friends outside of the home very often. When I was hanging out with my friends, that was usually more running around outside and stuff like that. Because me and my brother Doug were just so compatible when we played with our toys, we tended to just do that with each other. But yeah, I definitely remember playing with Battle Armor He-Man and Skeletor, and they were really cool. So I don't have that vintage one to show you. Just as a reminder, I still have my old vintage He-Man here. So I already brought this guy out when I talked about the other He-Man in the Origins line that came out in Wave 1. So if you recall, and actually let me just bring that He-Man out again for a second here. So here's the Wave 1 Origins He-Man, which was really great. It was based on this design. He's got the gray straps on him, which this figure would have if I hadn't lost them. And, so he was clearly based on that design. But one thing that a lot of people weren't happy about is that the head design was so different. A lot of people really like this look. That's the classic look they associate with He-Man, so they didn't really care for this new look. Anyway, so we get the Battle Armor version here now in the Deluxe. And you can see here he has got a brand new head sculpt, but it's still not like the old one. It's, if anything, it's just this head sculpt with a different expression. So this one's kind of got a little bit of gritted teeth showing, where this one here has got a yelling open mouth. So I think it's really cool. I like this head sculpt a lot. I still like this head sculpt a lot. So I'm happy with the consistency. I like that we just got a little bit of a different look there. Now, as far as the body on this guy, he's pretty much the same boots. I think looks like the colors are pretty much the same throughout. The belt, the shorts, everything looks the same. Orange cuffs. There's no additional painted details. So the head is different, and then the torso is different. And let's talk about this torso. So on the vintage Battle Armor He-Man, the gimmick was that he had this chest piece, and as you flicked it or hit it with another character's sword or axe, it would get battle damage. And if you hit it again, you would get even more battle damage. And that was a really cool action feature back in the day. So when Masters of the Universe got rebooted in 2002, let me just get rid of this guy for a second. We got a new version of He-Man, of course, in his standard outfit with the gray straps. But then we did also get a Battle Armor He-Man. Now, it was a little different. It wasn't a straight recreation of this look here. But this here is the 2002 Battle Armor He-Man. So you can see he's got a full armor on his chest. And it's gold instead of silver. So that's a little different. And he's also got some other new things. He's got this little kind of crown on his head. He's got this extra little bit, this furry cape. Otherwise, I think from the waist down, well, this is new as well, I believe. The armored chest piece, the original He-Man, I think was just kind of a furry loincloth. So, they did change some things up here. And this figure here, I don't know if he'll still do it. You'll notice there was a battery pack there, and he's got a little button on the side. He talked. But yeah. When you press this, he said, "I have the power," and I think he made a sword sound. But his batteries are long dead. So anyway, that's what this figure did, but he did not have anything to do with the battle damaged chest. This is just one piece there. You can flick that all day long. Nothing's going to happen. So yeah, I really thought this was cool to get a new version of Battle Armor He-Man. I thought it was a neat homage to the vintage figure, even though it was different and didn't retain the play feature of the battle damage. Then when the Classics line started, of course, we got the classic He-Man in the straps first, but we did get a secondary version of Battle Armor He-Man in 2010. And I do not have the 2010 Battle Armor He-Man. He looks very cool. He looks a lot like the vintage figure. He's gone back to a silver chest armor instead of the gold. He doesn't have the little crown like the 2002 version. So very, very much like the vintage figure. Now, he had the Battle Armor chest piece, but it didn't have the play feature. As I mentioned a second ago, talking about Clam Champ, they really didn't integrate any play features into the Classics line. But sometimes they would try to simulate them. For example, with Mech-A-Neck, the vintage figure, when you turned his waist, his neck would extend. The Classics figure didn't do that, but what it did come with was extra neck pieces, so you could extend Mech-A-Neck's neck and make it look like his neck was growing, but it wasn't done with just a push of a button or the twist of his legs. And the same with the Battle Armor He-Man in the Classics line. He came with different chest plates that you could change out. So there was the nice clean one, and then there was a little bit of battle damage and a lot of battle damage. So that was a cool way to substitute the action feature, and that was pretty cool, I guess. So let me get rid of this guy for a sec. Now, when it comes to the Origins line, Mattel is also doing another line. I guess you could call it kind of a sister line to this. It's called Masters of the WWE Universe. And what they're doing is they're taking wrestling characters from the WWE and giving them the same uniforms and outfits and tying them into the Masters of the Universe. I have a few of them. They're kind of fun, and maybe I'll do a video on them after I finished up with the regular He-Man figures. But anyway, the only reason I'm talking about them here is because I have this Macho Man figure, and you see he's got some Man-at-Arms armor, he's got Man-at-Arms club, he's got Man-at-Arms helmet. So he's got this whole kind of Man-at-Arms vibe to him. But for his armor here, where Macho Man, like the real Macho Man, had a purple t-shirt that had this logo on it with the sunglasses and all that stuff, I actually have this same t-shirt in purple with this logo on it. Macho Man was my favorite wrestler when I was a kid. Anyway, so they've given him Man-at-Arms parts, but they've also given him a chest piece, which is an homage to the vintage Battle Armor He-Man. And I thought that was pretty cool. But just like the Classics figure, in order to get the battle damage, you had to take his armor off, and you kind of poke this piece out, and you can replace it. So you see here, if you hit him with a weapon once, you can replace that sunglasses, and now the sunglasses are cracked. And then if you hit him another time, you could replace it with this piece, where the sunglasses are shattered. So I thought that was like a really fun way to recreate the damage on Macho Man with his sunglasses shirt. I just thought that was awesome. So since they did that for this figure, which came out first, I thought when we did eventually get Battle Armor He-Man and Skeletor, they would have the same function. They would have interchangeable plates for their chest. Anyway, I'm proud to report, or not proud, I had nothing to do with it, I'm happy to report that that is not the case. When it comes to these figures, they actually have the same feature that their vintage counterparts did. So if you, let me get a weapon here. So if you flick it with your finger, or if you hit it with a weapon, so you see here he's got a nice clean chest. If you hit it once, now he's got this battle damage, this one big mark across his chest. And if you hit it again, or maybe you gotta hit it hard, I guess. There you go. Now he's got two battle damages across his chest. So that's just like the vintage toy, and I think that's really cool that they integrated this back into it. To get it back to clean, you just roll it with your fingers, and it kind of locks in place when it gets back to the original. So yeah, really cool. Now, I think because of that feature, this guy doesn't come apart quite as much as the other figures. I think I had read somewhere that this guy's arms aren't removable because of this extra chest piece is modeled different than the other figures. So if you're really into the customization factor of these figures, that's maybe a bit of a bummer, but you know, I don't care. So I think that's really cool. Now, before we move on, there's a couple other important things to talk about with this figure. So what makes him deluxe? Sure, he's got the action feature, which is cool. He's got the axe, he's got the sword, but that's not really a whole lot more than any other figure would come with. So he's got an extra hand, just like Clam Champ. So now him and Clam Champ can get into a slap fight, because they both have one open hand available to them. He also came with this really cool translucent like energy effect, and the intent is that when he's doing the I have the power, you slide his sword into this thing, and his sword now is like powering up with energy. So that's pretty cool. And even if you don't like it on the sword, it's always fun to just get these effects. You can just use it as like a bonfire, or you could probably put it on the end of a gun turret or something. It's just neat to have these kind of blast effects. And then the other thing this figure came with, which I'm sure a lot of fans were happy about, is this head. So this is the vintage style He-Man head. So if I bring vintage He-Man back up here, you'll see how close it is. Sure, the hair is a little blonder, but the sculpt is pretty much spot on. So now, if you really prefer this head over these ones, you can plop this head on this guy, and now he looks much more like the vintage figure. Or you take your kind of classic He-Man, pop his head off there, pop this on, and there you go. Now you've got a He-Man that's probably much more to your liking. He's a lot more like the vintage figure. So yeah, this Battle Armor He-Man is really cool. Highly recommended. And yeah, let's move on to the next guy. So the next deluxe figure we're going to take a look at is Buzzsaw Hordak. Now, you might be looking at this guy and thinking, didn't we just look at this figure? And it's true, I did review a Hordak figure that looked a lot like this in my review of Wave 4. But this guy is a little bit different. Now, back in the vintage toy line, with He-Man and Skeletor being like the main hero and the main villain, as the toy line progressed year through year, Mattel wanted to make sure that kids could always get their hands on a He-Man and a Skeletor. I'm sure kids would have liked if they could always get their hands on a Beastman and Man-at-Arms and all that sort of stuff too, but unfortunately, you can't keep every figure in production forever. So what Mattel would do is they would give us things like Battle Armor He-Man and Battle Armor Skeletor, and then Thunder Punch He-Man and Terror Claws Skeletor. They would just find unique ways to kind of modify the stars of the show, so that way they were always on shelf, fresh for kids to buy. So with Hordak, when he was introduced, he became like a third main villain, and so they had to keep him on the shelves too. So we got the initial Hordak figure, and then we got this follow-up Hordak figure in 87. This is Buzzsaw Hordak, and there was a third one as well called Hurricane Hordak. Now, at least Hurricane Hordak looked different. He had a chrome gold chest piece, so he was very, distinguishable from the standard Hordak. But with Buzzsaw Hordak here, he looks basically the same. So, like, if you look at the vintage figure, which I don't have, neither my brother Doug or I had Hordak when we were kids, but I think my younger brother Brian had Hordak. He didn't have many He-Man figures, but yeah, Hordak was one of the few that he had. And to be honest, I can't remember if he had regular Hordak or if he had Buzzsaw Hordak. They were so similar, so it's hard to recall. Anyway, so with Hordak here, this is, the new one. This is Buzzsaw Hordak. Here's the Hordak I showed you when I reviewed Wave 4. Now, there is one kind of obvious difference. The heads are different. This guy also has this little goblin guy that hangs out on his wrist that this guy doesn't come with. But otherwise, they both come with the the bone crossbow with the little demon head on it. This guy, I talked about it in the other video about how his eyes, he's got these little beady red eyes, which are different from the vintage figure. And I quickly brought on this figure to show you that when they redid Hordak, they gave us the full red eyes with the black kind of under eyeliner, and that's more true to the vintage toy. So that's the only major difference that you notice right off the bat with these figures. Now, just as an interesting side note, in the time since I posted this video, somebody commented on the video that their Hordak figure actually has eyes like this, without the red pupils, but actually the full red eyes with the black under eyeliner. So if that's true, then I guess maybe the Mattel made a running change in these figures and they realized this was wrong and they corrected it. I don't know. Let me know, I guess, if you're sure of that in the comments, if you've seen both examples. But that's kind of interesting. And if it is true, I'm kind of glad I did get this one. Even if it's technically not accurate to the vintage figure, I kind of like that look. Especially now that we have this one here. It allows me a little bit more display options. So as far as Hordaks go to show you, I showed you all the previous Hordaks when I reviewed this figure. I don't have any previous versions of Buzzsaw Hordak to show you. They did make Buzzsaw Hordak in the Classics line. Like, here is my Classics Hordak, and he is not Buzzsaw Hordak. This is just standard Hordak. But when they did re-release this guy in the Classics line as Buzzsaw Hordak, you would barely notice to look at them. Like, I think the Buzzsaw version has, maybe his reds are a little brighter. I think he lacks some of the silver accents. Like, he might not have the silver lining on his boots that this guy does. But basically, they look the exact same. You would only know he was Buzzsaw Hordak if you popped his chest open to reveal his action feature. And that's where this guy is different from this guy. This guy here, you see his cape attached to his back, his chest, nothing's going to open up on his chest here. But this guy, you see his cape, it's a little different. He's got this kind of lever here, and when you push that, his chest is supposed to open. Now, I forget how to do it here. Let me figure it out. Okay, for the life of me, I cannot get this to work. I don't know if I broke it. I know it did work when I first got him. But if you push on this lever, his chest piece is supposed to fly open, and it doesn't. So I can flick it with my fingernail, and it reveals a little hidden compartment in his chest that this figure doesn't have. But, yeah, so that's too bad that it's broken, but I don't really care because I don't really play with these things. And sometimes when I have figures with projectile weapons, and I display them on my shelf, sometimes they just tend to go off and little missiles get launched around the room, And that's kind of a pain in the ass because they tend to knock figures over. So I guess, if anything, I'm kind of glad this guy doesn't work because I wouldn't want his chest flying open randomly and him shooting buzzsaws. So yeah, buzzsaws. You might be thinking, well, where's the buzzsaw? So I don't have any in there, but he came with this buzzsaw that's kind of star-shaped. Let me get him to stand up here. And then he came with a second buzzsaw with the kind of little more angled blades. And who knows, maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's because I didn't have a buzzsaw in him. So if I put a buzzsaw and tuck it in there, there we go. Now I think it'll work. So you felt that clip into place. You close his chest. You push back on this lever here. And that's supposed to fly open. And this buzzsaw is supposed to fly out and decapitate He-Man. I don't see that happening anytime soon, but that's the way it's supposed to work. So, it comes with 2 buzzsaws. He comes with his bow. And guess what? He comes with an extra hand. So, I already have him displayed with his slappy hand. But if you want to give him 2 gripping hands, you could. So, there's the option. Now, I really debated on whether I should buy this figure or not, because I already had this guy, and I didn't care about the action feature, and I just didn't know if it was justified. But again, the price on these guys, it's just so affordable, it seems silly to not buy them and then maybe regret it later. I was like, whatever, I'll spend the $15 to get this guy. So, yeah. So he's pretty similar. Now, the head sculpt, I didn't realize at the time, I don't think, that the head sculpts were different, like as far as the eyes go. But there is some other difference there, and you notice this paint on his side here is gray, whereas this guy is pretty stark black. So that's another difference. And because this is a deluxe figure, he comes with an additional head. So here is the other head. So this one is a lot closer to this one. It looks a little angrier. He's kind of scowling with his like bloody overbite there, I guess. So it's still different in that the eyes are bigger and that it's got gray cheeks instead of black cheeks. But, and I think this is the head that was on him when you bought him in the packaging. And the alternate head was this one here with the smile. And I kind of like the smile. Partly just because it's, it's different from that one. So, yeah, that's a nice option to have a happy little Hordak there. So, there you go. I think that's all I really have to say about Buzzsaw Hordak. So the next deluxe figure we've got here is Ram Man. Now, Ram Man, he's another one of the heroic characters. The original figure was released back in 1983, the second, as part of the second assortment of Masters of the Universe. And he was a cool character. He was kind of a cool toy, but he didn't do much. And I don't have the vintage figure here to show you. My brother Doug had the vintage Ram Man, and he looked a lot like this, but he was very limited in his articulation as opposed to even all the other figures. Like, the main selling feature of the Origins figures is that they're like the vintage ones but more articulated, because the vintage figures didn't have a whole lot of articulation. Well, Ram Man really didn't have a lot of articulation. Because the way he was sculpted, this whole chest piece here was all one piece and it was hollow. And his arms were kind of sculpted like this, and they could turn a little bit back and forth, like you could spin them a little bit there. But then his legs were stuck together as one big hunk of plastic like this, and they didn't bend. And the reason for that is because you push them up into his torso, and once you did that, you clicked a little button on his back, and he sprung forward and rammed. That was his whole gimmick. So he was meant as like a human battering ram. So you could crunch his legs up to his body and release him, and he would butt his head forward and knock the door off Castle Grayskull or knock over Skeletor or whatever you wanted to do. So yeah, he was kind of fun. That was kind of a neat action feature. I liked the way he looked. But yeah, not a super functional toy as far as articulation goes. So, I don't have that one to show you. And he did have a figure in the 2002 line. And it was a really cool redesign. They made him a big, bulky character, which I thought always suited the character. When you see how wide set he is, and considering he's a battering ram, he always seemed really short in the Filmation cartoon. And it just seemed a little odd that you would have this little teeny guy busting doors open and stuff. It would make more sense to me that he was a big, bulky guy. So in the 2002 cartoon, they portrayed him as like he kind of was head and shoulders above everybody else. He was this big, hulking dude. And the action figure conveyed that. However, even though it had all kinds of nice new sculpting and everything, it recreated the play feature of the vintage figure, which made him very unfunctional as well. You could still tuck his legs up into his torso, so that meant his legs had no articulation. They were still stuck together. So yeah, it was a cool looking figure. I liked that redesign. Unfortunately, I don't have it here. But yeah, it was pretty cool. So my first Ram Man, since I didn't have either the vintage or the 2002 one, was the Classics version. And that came out in 2013. And it is an awesome figure. Here we go. This is Classics Ram Man. As you can see, this guy is big. You know, he didn't necessarily tower over the other figures, but he was like about twice as wide as the other figures. He is a big dude. And for the first time, we got some really nice articulation on Ram Man. He was able to like move his arms, bend his elbows, bend his knees. He actually has knee joints. They're kind of hidden there. But there you go. See, there is a joint there for his knee. You know, ankles, all that stuff. Just a really great look for Ram Man. He could finally turn his head. You know, it wasn't just part of his torso sculpt. So yeah, I really loved this design of Ram Man. Even look at he's got on the little skulls on his treads of his boots. How cool is that? Anyway, so this was a great figure, and they actually re-released this figure in alternate colors. It was based on the back of the kind of cross-promotional packaging. Ram Man appeared with like an orange tunic and red pants. The vintage toy came out with the red tunic and green pants, and that's how he appeared in the cartoon, and that's how the first Classics figure was painted. But it is kind of cool for people that liked that old classic kind of cross-promotion art that Mattel did go back and give us a repaint in those colors, and it was pretty cool. But I never bothered to seek that one out, just because I prefer the red and the green colors. Anyway, one thing that was cool that we got with this classic Ram Man that we had never gotten before was this unmasked head. So you can see there, he's still got like the same facial features. He's still got that weird squint going on his face. And then you see this plate on his head. And I guess it's not just the fact that he's got this big helmet that he can ram through doors. It looks like he has a metal plate screwed into the top of his skull. So that explains a little bit why he's able to ram through things. So anyway, this was a really cool added feature with this figure. So now we have the Origins figure to look at. And he's pretty cool. He's a lot better than the vintage one in that, like I said, his arms now move. He's got more functionality, so they move around different ways. He's got the elbows for the first time. He's got wrists that move around forward and backward. His head actually does move. It's pretty limited because of this helmet design. But, you know, he can look around quite a bit. And then, I don't think there's anything in the torso here, no. But his legs, they're not stuck together like the vintage toy. I'm kind of surprised that they separated them. And he's got knee joints, so he can bend his knees. Might take me a second here. There you go. So he can bend his knee. He can turn, I think, at the boot cut. Or maybe not at the boot cut, but he can spin there at his knee. And I didn't think with giving him all that, he'd still be able to retain the vintage action feature. But he does. You can still squish his waist down like that, and then kind of make him pop up to spring up. So he doesn't have the lever on his button like the vintage figure did, but he still has that ramming function while still giving him leg articulation. So that's pretty great. You know, that's kind of the best of both worlds. Because this guy, of course, he's got the leg articulation, which was nice, but he doesn't have that, he doesn't have any sort of play feature. He can't ram, if you will. So yeah, very cool with this guy. Now, obviously, he's a little lighter in the details and stuff. The sculpt is, you know, a lot softer. You know, the paint apps are fewer. You'll see here he doesn't have the stitching painted on his tunic like this guy does. There's no skulls in this guy's treads. He doesn't even have any treads. So, a simpler design, but that's why these figures are so cheap and so, you know, so fun. Anyway, what makes this guy deluxe? So, sure, you can see there he's got two axes. So, the one double-bladed axe and the one single-bladed axe. And he's got two gripping hands. He doesn't come with a slapping hand, but he does come with one extra hand, which is a fist. So if you want to change out that hand so you can punch somebody in the face, you can do that. And then he comes with an extra head, just like all these deluxe figures. And I'm kind of surprised that they didn't go this route and give us the unhelmeted head. Instead, what they've done is they've given us this head, which I think is brand new. I don't think we've ever seen this before, where there's almost like a secondary like shield comes down here and forms over his mouth and nose. And I think that looks really cool, actually. Like, I've been displaying him like this just because that's kind of the classic design I'm used to. But to be honest, if Ram Man had this face when I was a kid, I would have liked the character a lot more. I think he looks a lot cooler with this fully masked design. So yeah, really cool. I'm really glad they included that and didn't go with the obvious route of the unmasked head like we got in classics. So anyway, that's Ram Man. So the last deluxe figure we're going to take a look at is Battle Armor Skeletor. Now, where the original Battle Armor Skeletor came out in '84, just like the Battle Armor He-Man. They came out, basically, and were marketed as, arch enemies. Look at them now. They've got this armor that they can destroy. But in the classics line, we got the He-Man in 2010, but we didn't get the Skeletor till 2011. So, I don't have the vintage Skeletor to show you, but he was very similar to the He-Man in that he had, a chest piece here where you could inflict battle damage. He looked a lot like this figure in design. So, similar to the He-Man. He-Man normally would have a bare, flesh tone chest with the gray X's across it, the gray straps. Skeletor, similarly, the original Skeletor had his bare blue chest, but then he had these purple straps that went across. And then when we got to the battle armor, they had full armor covering their full torso. So yeah, if you were to look at this figure side by side with the vintage Battle Armor He-Man, they should look pretty similar. Probably the biggest difference would be the head sculpt. This guy has got a kind of a different looking face, whereas the vintage Skeletor, like the very first one that came out in '82, that same look kind of carried over onto his Battle Armor figure that came out in '84. But just like with He-Man here, so I'm going to bring up my first Skeletor. This is from Wave 1 of Origins. So a lot of the things I said about He-Man, I could say about this figure. This figure looked a lot like the original Skeletor. A lot of people liked it, but the head was different. They kind of went a different way. They gave him an open mouth. It's a little more cartoony, and some fans probably weren't really happy with this. So then when the Battle Armor figure came out, you'd expect them to package it with the new and improved head that fans wanted, and instead they didn't. They gave us something else entirely. So this is a totally different head sculpt. I like this one too. It's kind of weird. Like, it doesn't really match this one, like where the two He-Man's heads looked very, very similar. Like, it looked like it was the same guy, just making different facial expressions. These don't look the same to me. Like, the way the head is painted, like this guy's clearly got a yellow on the front of his face, and then the rest of his head is like green. Where this one here, it's not so much like that. It's much more of a fade. It's not so obvious. It's kind of like the whole skull is kind of a yellowish green. The way the eyes are painted, it's kind of like with the Hordak with the little beady eyes. He looks a little more menacing and scary, whereas this guy's got these crazy big red eyes. He looks a little nuts. And then the nose is painted differently. The mouth, I guess, is painted similarly. If this guy closed his mouth, he would just have those little stitchy lines across his mouth the way this guy does. So I like both these designs, but they're not really like the vintage figure. Anyway, when it comes to Battle Armor Skeletor, he did get a Battle Armor version in the 2002 line, but unlike He-Man, which was pretty close with the full body armor, it still had it was chromed up like the vintage figure and everything. The Battle Armor Skeletor was something way out of whack. It was totally different. It had these big, crazy snap-on appendages and stuff. So Skeletor did not get a new version like that in the 2002. Even besides the 2002 figure, He-Man got a Staction figure of him in the battle armor, but Skeletor didn't get that either. There was literally no representation of this outfit in the 2002 line. It wasn't until 2011 when we got Battle Armor Skeletor in the Classics line, and that's this figure here. So, here's Classic Skeletor in the battle armor. And as I already talked about, he's got the action feature where you can slash his chest, but like the Macho Man, you have to change out the panels. You can't actually inflict the damage because there was no play features in the Classics line. Now, I actually brought up this Skeletor in my video when I was reviewing Wave 1 to compare it to this figure. And I had a different head on him at the time because I prefer to display this Skeletor with this head, which I got later. I think this is a much cooler head. But for the sake of this video, I decided to put on the classic head sculpt that you're seeing here now, because this one is much more true to the vintage Skeletor toy. So, like with He-Man, a lot of fans didn't want this head. They didn't want this head. They wanted a head that looked like this. And so with Battle Armor Skeletor, you finally get a head that's much closer to the vintage Skeletor design. So this one here is supposed to kind of represent that. And, it's pretty close. It's a lot closer than what this thing is here. And, these are pretty similar actually, but yeah, it's different enough, and I think a lot of fans were happy to get this head here, which is a lot truer to the vintage toy line. So yeah, he's got the extra head. He's also got a shield with a skull on it, so that's pretty cool. And that just clips on his forearm like so. So with this, he's got an open hand here, so you can put his fingers through that, and then clip the shield on. I'm having a bit of a hard time, but you get the idea. Okay, I'll be honest. I just tried for several minutes to get this shield on his hand. So his fingers will slide through there, but trying to clip this onto his forearm, because Skeletor has these kind of bony protrusions on his arm, it just would not clip on there. I'm sure there's a way, but yeah, it just wasn't working for me, and I was worried I was actually scratching the figure up a little bit, so forget the shield. That's going in the accessory bin. But he also has his Havoc staff with the goat head on it, and then of course he's got his sword as well, the purple power sword. So yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, that's Skeletor. I don't know if you would necessarily need both of these in your collection unless you're like a hardcore fan. But like I said about He-Man, a lot of kids grew up with this being their default Skeletor because, this was the second version of him released. By that time, the line was probably even more popular after the first year. So yeah, I bet a lot of people had this as their default Skeletor, and it's probably a lot of people's favorites. I prefer the original looks, but yeah. They're both good enough that you could definitely put them both in your collection, and these figures are affordable enough for you to go out and grab both of them. So yeah, there you are. That's the last of the deluxe figures. The next one that's coming out is Mosquito. Some people might have that figure in hand already. My pre-order is still up on Big Bad Toy Store, so I don't have him to talk about yet. But yeah, I'm probably going to have him in the next month or two, so stay tuned for that. So that was my review of the Masters of the Universe Origins deluxe figures. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave me comments below. That's much appreciated as well. So I'll be back soon with, I think I have one, maybe two more videos in this series, and then we'll be back on to my usual stuff like G.I. Joes and Transformers and whatnot. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.